Hey, good afternoon out there to everyone, and almost happy Halloween. Hope everybody's having a great fall so far, and looking forward to the holiday season ahead. I know that I am. It's been a few months since I've put a video out on my page, so I figured it was probably time to do so. And today, what I wanted to talk to you guys about is I've been hearing a lot of different opinions from people that I interact with about what the presidential election is going to do to the real estate market and how it's going to impact that. I've talked to friends and family. I've talked to certainly the general public as I've sat in a lot of open houses or done brokers open events or marketing events in certain communities over the past few months. And there is no shortage of people's opinions and feelings, and most of those which seem like they're ones of concern over what's going to happen with the outcome of the election and how that's going to impact the real estate market. So I figured it was time to come on here and try to do my best to provide some historical data and fact-based statistics to talk about what's happened in past elections, regardless of the candidate or the party, and how that impacts the real estate market after. So I've talked to a lot of the smartest people around me in terms of real estate experience to get their opinions. I've also engaged with some of our lender partners in the community that send me constant updates and information to try to get the best formed and fact-based advice that they could. So I wanted to share all of that with you guys today. So a couple of things that I wanted to share first and foremost, and if you see this in my monthly newsletter, I'm going to kind of restate a couple of the things that I called out there. The first thing being, typically in past elections, the only pain that's felt in the real estate market is very short term, very temporary. And coming out of those election timeframes, you don't typically see significant swings, whether it's interest rates climbing or falling, as well as mass fluctuation in terms of inventory that's available in the market or even how pricing happens across the market. So contrary to popular belief, historically, nine out of the last 11 presidential elections, right? So going back 44 years into the early 1980s, home sales have gone up after 9 of the last presidential elections. The only elections in which home sales went down was in 1981, directly following the 80 election, and then 1989, directly following the 1988 election. Every single election since, so 8 different elections, home prices have gone up after each one of those elections has taken place. Home prices have gone up after 7 of the last 8 presidential elections. So the annual median sales price of existing single-family houses that have been sold in the United States has gone up in 7 of the last 8 elections. The only election that it has not gone up was directly following the housing crisis, which took place in 2008's election and then 2009's housing. And that is a complete anomaly in terms of historically what's happened in the housing market, just based on the housing crisis in 2007 that took place. So, that should build some confidence for people, I think. Let's talk mortgage rates. So, mortgage rates leading into election timeframes have typically just decreased over time. 8 of the last 11 presidential elections, there have been mortgage rates decreasing in the time leading up to the election. The only exceptions were in 1980. Mortgage rates actually went up 2% before the election. 1992, it went up 0.2 of a point. And then most recently in 2016, when it was Trump and Hillary Clinton, mortgage rates actually went up 0.3 of a point before that election took place, and rates were in the mid threes at that time frame. So they jumped from 3.4 to 3.7 before that election took place. Most recently, in the 2020 election, which was Trump and Biden, rates actually fell 0.25 of a point going into election time frame from 3.02 to 2.77%. So pretty historically steady that rates decline leading into election timeframes. Interestingly enough, there is not a lot of data published on what happens to rates coming out of election timeframes. There's obviously lots of information on home sales, home pricing, but in terms of actual mortgage rate changes, typically you do not see significant swings. You do not see major, Federal Reserve slashing prices a couple of points from where they were currently, or maybe even before the election took place. That does not historically tend to happen. Obviously, the Fed's cut rates here about 4 weeks ago by 50 basis points. They had alluded to potentially cutting again before the end of the year, another 50 basis points, but due to some of the progress that they've seen in job reports, as well as inflation cooling, even though inflation's still 2.4%, they consider that to be cooling versus recent trends. They are communicating that they're likely not going to do another interest rate cut before the end of the year. So if that helps kind of inform and educate you to know that, you may not see another interest rate cut again, despite the election and the outcome, until the spring of next year. So just kind of moving forward here, a couple other pieces of information that I wanted to share with this audience. If you look at housing inventory right now across the United States, obviously there's been over a 10-year shortage in terms of inventory of housing in the United States, which has really challenged builders to try and catch up to the increased demand, especially in Idaho, when you have a shortage on inventory. So if we look at latest inventory statistics, housing inventory is building due to slow sales, but new listings are back near historic lows. If you look at 2024, there's just over 60,000 listings across the United States. Comparatively to last year, there was 56,600 at this time. 2022, again, 56,500 at that time. So you're seeing obviously a slowdown happen in the real estate market, but that's helping builders to be able to catch up in terms of inventory to meet the demand, and especially if we start to see another increase happen in the market here in the coming months. Low housing inventory is going to keep pressure on home prices. There's no doubt about that. The cost to build, the cost to produce, the labor, the materials, all of those things are not going to go down. If anything, they're going to continue to go up. So just keep that in mind as you consider, especially whether you're buying existing resale or you are planning to do new construction, and just take that into consideration. But I wanted to mention a couple things. Here's the good news. Before the last 30 days, in which interest rates have started to climb back up some from like the mid sixes to now it's almost back at 7% for a 30-year, rates had come down in the previous 3 months before that. They'd fallen all the way from the high sevens, low eights earlier in the year down to almost inside of 5%. So that's a positive indicator. Despite some of the low inventory, some of the slowdown is allowing home builders to catch up to market demand, as I was discussing. And then also, I think statistically we're seeing, and you can read the article that I posted in my newsletter, despite election results concerns and the impact on the economy, history tells us that election year pains are usually small and temporary. And the market, especially the housing market, is going to continue to be resilient regardless of the outcome. And if you're a seller that's considering when to time it right and put your home on the market, and you're worried about losing value, totally fair concern. I would encourage you to not worry about losing value on your home with who is elected president of the United States. History tells us that prices typically rise on home values after an election. They don't fall after an election's over. So that's great news in terms of you being able to go and get the best price for your home as we head into 2025. So just kind of wrapping everything up, what would my advice be to all of you in terms of considering when to make a move in the real estate market? There's a couple things. The first thing that I would say is if you're a buyer specifically on the sidelines waiting to see what happens with the election, there's no amount of information or data or statistics that it may be able to change that decision for you. At the end of the day, you are going to need to make a decision based on when you feel comfortable and when financially it makes sense and you have confidence in the market to be able to go make that decision. However, keep in mind, I would prepare that you're going to pay more in the coming months for an existing home or new construction, depending on what you're considering doing. As I mentioned, the cost for materials, labor, production are not slowing down. Those are going to continue to go up. Many builders that I have interacted with and that we represent here in the Treasure Valley have communicated that. Their prices are not going down in terms of what they're being charged, what they have to pay their subcontractors. So those prices and what it costs to build a home are not going to go down. So prepare to pay more potentially for the same home that you want months down the road versus what you're looking at from a purchase price perspective today. Also, buyers, you are likely going to see a lot heavier competition as other buyers are going to get off the sidelines as well. I mentioned that a couple months ago in my note, but if interest rates do start to come down and that gives encouragement to people to get off the sidelines and make their move, that's the case for many people. So if you were maybe before thinking about putting an offer in on a home and you only had to worry about competing with one or two other offers that were coming in on that same home, you may be up against 8 or 9 different offers. And when you start going into pricing and competition, that leads to bidding wars. And if we learned anything from COVID, especially in the housing market, bidding wars were evident, all cash offers were evident, and people were paying a lot of money, maybe in most cases overpaying in certain situations than what they should have been because cash was king and inventory was low and you had a lot of competition for it. So just understand that you're going to be up against competition and that you're likely going to be paying a higher purchase price on your home in the months down the road when you decide to buy. Secondly, I would say understand your options. You don't know what you don't know right now. Reach out to a lender, somebody that you trust. If you have a preferred lender, great. If you need recommendations, let me know. I have plenty. Have them pull you an updated quote or a pre-qualification. It costs nothing to do. It's a great exercise to understand where your current credit score exists, what your new interest rate would be if you were to purchase a new home, and giving up your current interest rate and what the new interest rate would be. And then what kind of monthly payment would you be looking at, right? That's the most important thing, is how is that going to be impacted versus what your mortgage payment may be today. Also, lenders are doing some creative things to try to drive some stimulus right now in the housing market. I am seeing lenders that are willing to waive fees at closing, whether they are closing costs or a portion of the closing costs, waiving origination fees, appraisal fees, a lot of the things that you as the buyer typically will pay for during a home transaction in order to help close a transaction in a deal right now. So I would definitely, go and see what that looks like for you. They're also offering, in some cases, free refinancing at no cost. Some of that may be for valued customers. And for other people, that is, hey, we will allow you to wait until the interest rates come down, and then you can refinance when you are ready at no cost to you. So for anybody that's bought their interest rate down, sometimes that can be a very expensive one-time lump sum to buy your rate down. Take advantage of that with lenders if that's something that they're offering, because they may not offer that down the road. And then third and lastly, what I would recommend is, instead of trying to time the market and waiting for certain events to happen, historically, that is where people can often get into trouble in the housing market, is because when you're trying to time the market right, so is everybody else. Make a decision on your timeline with what works for you financially and when you are best prepared to make that decision, right? It's a huge financial decision, and it's also a very emotionally based decision, but make it based in logic and one that makes sense for you. Because history tells us those that wait, it usually ends up costing them in the end, and trying to time and position themselves with what the market is doing. You have to do that to a certain extent, but don't let that window of opportunity pass you by if you feel like you're in a good enough space to be able to do it, so that it's not costing you more in the long run. So anyway, that is my information for the month. Certainly interested to see what happens here in the next 7 or 8 days with the upcoming election. But just know, no matter what the outcome is and what the result is, we know that the housing market is still going to continue to be stable and resilient. And provide this information to anybody else that may be considering the same. And I look forward to catching up with you guys here this next month and providing some more helpful information. Thanks, everybody.